So now we're going to talk about how to, once again, this is going to be a recurring theme today, and that's about change and about leadership. In other words, how do we actually get to this happy future that everybody seems to want, but every one of us is finding very difficult to get to, and what that change would require, and who should and who and how ought to be provoking it. And to discuss this with me, I would like to invite up Naoko Ishii, who's the Chief Executive Officer and Chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, and Manfred Rudhard, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Arriva. Thank you both. So, leadership and change. So as I mentioned, we all know that change needs to happen, and this change needs to be quite dramatic. Naoko, you as the head of a not the largest international body, but a very important one, and one that with some with an enviable track record, you've dealt with a lot of leaders over the years. And you have the convening power to get them all together into a room and discuss change. So how do you, and a lot of them I suspect will very happily sign up to promoting change in the abstract. How do you get them to actually move from those fine words to deeds? And make sure that they don't all pull in different directions, right? Because one of the problems with leaders, with people who see themselves as leaders, is that they often have a very clear idea of what they want, and unfortunately those ideas do not always overlap. And so how do you go about trying to channel that enthusiasm into a direction that will be pulling the world, and the Jeff specifically, in the right direction, as you see it, as the Uber leader?
Thank you. So happy to be here, particularly to this session which discuss about change, how to actually realize the change. In fact, my guess is that not many of you know about GEF. So just
I'm sure everybody knows about it.
No, actually the GEF was created 27 years ago to actually serve the climate convention, biodiversity and land. And now recently the Stockholm and the Mercury convention, Minamata convention. But actually the challenge is that, let's say, we have been doing the 4,000 project and then 18 billion US dollars for last 27 years. And if you just see what's going on, the fact, it's very clear we have not been successful. We have not really met the mission we were tasked to achieve. So that it's very important for us to actually think about what went wrong, or what's not really being insufficient, not insufficient. To us, the problem is that while we were doing this 4,000 projects, and these are 80% of them are rated successful because they are measured by that very traditional, conventional way of measuring. It's an incremental change. The biodiversity project to do that protection, the national park, the climate change, a little bit of that energy efficiency. But these really don't add up to actually move the needle. And it's very short to think about how we can catalyze the system change. So that the reflection we are now doing seriously is that how that this small institution like the GF, whose mission is actually quite big, to how to take care of global environment, how we can really catalyze the leadership which requires that, which is required to the system change. Yeah, you are quite right that an individual leader has his or her vision and a dream, and they are all kind of, good at talking about it. But in reality, when we think about what kind of system change we need, what we need is really the collective will and the collective and the platform, so that the individual company or the leader can kind of be a part of the bigger change. That's, I found it's a very, very challenging. That the leaders are usually good at maybe in his own castle or that silos, but not always good at losing the voice? Yeah. Okay. To create the platform force them to be a part of the bigger picture. Let me just take one example. Today, I'm very happy to hear we are not talking not only climate change, but on the food and land use system or agriculture. In fact, the food system is one of the biggest destroyer of the global environment. But in order for us to do this food and land use system right, we really need a very diverse actors along the supply chain of the food system, from the production of the industrial and the small holders to the traders, to the processors, and then the consumers. How you can bring everybody together along that value chain. And that is actually quite a challenging thing. We have been hearing this in the TFA, Tropical Forest Alliance 2020. We have been hearing this New York Declaration of the Forest, and now the newly created Food and Land Use Coalition. There are a lot of good collection of goodwill. How you can really bring them together to do the real work what you have been saying. And this is actually the new challenge to the leaders in those kind of either government or the private sector or the CSOs or the consumer side, how we can really come together to share the dream and then force them to be a part of the bigger picture. I think it's that the world is started to realize that's very much needed. And the leadership, I think what we need is not necessarily that the very visionary, the top of the helm. It's more like to realize what is needed and to actually get outside, get out of their own comfort zone and try to see that what is the system change they need and to try to play its parts. So that is actually the new type of the leadership.
So Manfred, you're sort of one of the people who, in a sense, would be one of those silos. You're sort of you're present in an industry. Yep. You're a businessman. You lead a commercial organization. How do you lead your organization beyond that silo? What do you think it would take, and what do you think the big obstacles are that you need to overcome in order to do that, and how would you go about overcoming them?
First of all, I am humbled by the size of the challenge that you are facing, and just being reminded throughout the day how big the challenge actually is, and listening to...
Hopefully not everyone will come out of this room depressed at the end of the day.
Not depressed, or yes. So it is a massive challenge, and I'm being challenged by that. I'm trying to ask for myself the questions: what can I do in my tiny, or maybe mid-sized bubble of a 14-country operation where we're providing public transportation to 14 countries? I think there's two answers to that. There's how do we do things right? And that's almost becoming, at least for my company, almost something like a hygiene factor. So we were talking about measurement. We are measuring, of course, the CO2 emissions that we're having in our operations, and they are substantial because we're operating 20,000 buses and more than 1,000 trains. We are measuring that. We're measuring spills. We're measuring all the environmental impact that we're producing, and not only measuring them, but we're actively managing them. Mm-hmm. So every quarter I get a report of all the environmental impact that we're doing, all the things that go wrong or right, and of course we're managing them accordingly. So it is a broad topic that we're dealing with it. But that's almost, like I said, a hygiene factor, and you could almost tick the box. Mm-hmm. When it comes to improving that situation, and you were asking for leadership, what can a leader do about this? We established a year ago an initiative called Driving a River, where we decided that we need to influence our drivers. We're employing roughly 40,000 drivers. We need to influence them to drive in a more, let's call it, sustainable way. So we're starting to put technology on the buses. We're measuring the individual driving behavior of our drivers, and then we're introducing a training program to bring the fuel consumption and fuel consumption down, and sustainability in the wider sense up. We believe that we can save between 5 to 8% of our fuel bill and of our fuel consumption and of the CO2 emission by doing this. You were asking for leadership. I'm the personal sponsor of that thing. So I'm going out there into the depots. I'm talking to some of the drivers, of course, and I'm trying to push the whole thing forward.
Can you drive a bus?
I can't. It's a shame. I tried once, and I think I'd rather abstain from it.
It looks so difficult.
It is. It's absolutely. And when you try to do this,
job.
I'm taking my services here in London, so by the way, if you're going on one of the red double-decker buses, there's a 1 in 5 chance that it's the Riva bus, so get on there and see what it does and see how difficult it's becoming to drive or to produce public transportation in a city like London. But then you were asking about what is it that I can really do beyond the almost hygiene factors, beyond the things which are addressable to me. And I'm in a relatively privileged situation that my business success is contributing to sustainability. Because we've just had the discussion with the mayor of a European capital last night, where we both agreed that we need to be able to bring private cars out of the cities. So the more services I provide, the more I can convince our municipalities, our governments, our passengers to use public transportation, and the more they're inclined to stay away from their private cars, the more I am successful, also commercially, also shareholder value-wise, but more importantly, I am contributing to sustainable development of a city and a rural area. So I'm in a relatively privileged situation in this respect that my targets in terms of sustainability are aligned with my commercial targets.
But you also have a fleet of vehicles, right, which are not all of which are entirely sustainable in the sense that they're not all electric, right? So you do have a fleet of buses and trains which run on dirty fossil fuels which emit carbon dioxide. They may be very fuel efficient, but you know the carbon dioxide problem is a cumulative problem. It's not a flow problem, it's a stock problem, and so long as we're emitting, we're contributing to the problem. Leveling off emissions is not good enough, they need to come down. So you're faced as the boss of a company with the prospect of either of getting ahead, leading the way in moving towards a fully electric fleet, but you have to overcome the problem of what that means in practice to your bottom line, right? I mean, could you convert from one day could you stop running your diesel or petrol-powered buses overnight?
I could immediately, and I would be bankrupt the next morning. Of course. So maybe this is probably a bit of a wider discussion, and since I'm an electrical engineer, I'm of course relatively prone to run electric gadgets. But in reality, when we look at sustainability impact of an electric bus or electric car, I'm not entirely convinced that it comes without its detriment. So if I want to make a relatively controversial statement here, if I can take, by running a Euro 6 bus, if I can take 50 Teslas off the road, I'm still doing something for sustainability. I'm adding more to it. If I can do this with an electric bus, so much better. But coming back to your question, what is it that I can possibly do? Just take the example of my balance sheet, of my P&L. Modern Euro 6 diesel bus costs about 200,000 euros. A same size, same capacity electric bus, about double. And that's not going to change dramatically in the foreseeable future. It might come down slightly. So from my business case, it's going to be extremely difficult to justify to myself or simply to my balance sheet that I can switch to electric fleet. Notwithstanding that, our business model is one where we're not entirely depending on passengers and on our own operations, but the third party here, which is playing an extremely important role, are the so-called PTAs, the public transportation authorities, either the municipalities or the governments or the regions that are ordering our services and are paying for them. So of course my task will be, if I believe that electric is the answer, my task will be and is that I can convince a municipality to do something more sustainable. But then I'm also a bit worried about the fact that we seem to believe that simple answers do the job. So electric vehicles can be part of the answers. But for me, it's much more important to have a much more holistic concept, a systemic approach to public transportation, which we deliver together with the municipality. Very simple question. If London tells me tomorrow that they are only tendering electric buses, then of course I will deliver those electric buses, but they will come at a higher price for London. We're being paid by the mile. Knowing that London in its budget is restricted, they will have to make trade-off decisions of where can I cut services. And if those services are being cut somewhere in the outskirts, I'm almost forcing the population out there in the outskirts to take a private car because they simply don't have mobility anymore. And we see those situations probably not quite as, in a more staggering way in places in the Netherlands and places in Germany, where many rural areas or suburban areas are almost deprived of mobility. So it's always a trade-off decision of where does society want to invest in terms of, is it just purely electric? Or would it be good enough to have a diesel car, but also a combined and modern mobility scheme, which I think is much more the thing.
I think, I mean, this is exactly, I think talking about trade-offs and reminding people that for every sort of seemingly environmentally friendly action, there is some sort of a reaction somewhere along the line, because we live in an ecosystem which is fully connected. Now, Naoko, you have a sort of an overview of that ecosystem in a way, because Jeff finances all manner of endeavors around the world, right? So you see those trade-offs very clearly when you allocate resources.
It's not really a trade-off. It's more like can we really identify where the resources, limited resources, should go to deploy that or catalyze the systemic change. I very much wanted to actually add and support what he said. I mean, that I mentioned the importance of changing the food and land use system because it's a major destroyer of the carbon and the land and the forest and the biodiversity, water and the ocean. But also another actually priority to the GEF is actually that the comprehensive urban planning. And rather than just doing just the transport or the bus, if we take the city as a system, then that you can have a more integrated, comprehensive, holistic urban design to fit the transport is very important. If you do the city design right, and if you do the transport right, the building right, and the waste management right, you actually then help the 80% of the problem which the city has. So that when we think about a system change, that I mean the important thing is, as you mentioned, that the leaders, the city, maybe planners, the mayors, and then do work with you that to think about how you can really bring the sustainability.
We're going to have a couple of mayors coming on right after this panel, so we will we'll discuss this with them.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the floor? We have a question over there, and then another one in the front here.
Yeah, Martin Vierhofer again from KPMG in Germany. Our firm has assessed for Volvo trucks the true total cost of ownership of an electric bus. And I agree with what you just said. If you just look at the total cost of ownership, it's actually more expensive than a biodiesel bus, for example. But if you look at the true total cost of ownership, it's actually cheaper. So if you're able to tell that story to your clients, and your clients are public, so they are basically the managers of the societal stocks, you could say, of the society. And if you could tell them, yes, it's going to cost you more on that silo that you're managing, but you have good arguments to justify those extra investments because it's going to save society costs on other areas. So basically the question is, where does the governments manage basically their investments in that way that they prevent future costs to occur?
Completely agree with that, but I think my answer would be slightly different. If we take the holistic approach with our governments, with our customers, then I would try to discuss with them a more holistic mobility approach, because it always comes also not only with a financial and an environmental trade-off, but also with a social trade-off. The development we're currently seeing in this country that in rural areas, many of the villages are now deprived of mobility and are almost forced to use a private car if they want to participate in social life. That comes at a huge cost for the environment, for the economy, but also for the social well-being of those areas. And I think this is not just the only answer that we can provide. When we look into different countries, the answers that the society is providing to this question is a different one. My pledge would be, let's take a more holistic approach of what we're doing here. And electric vehicles can be an answer. And of course, we're talking to some of the PTAs, and we're delivering some of that already in the Netherlands, for example, where we're delivering a fully holistic mobility approach from trains, from electric buses. So we migrate in one of the regions in the Netherlands completely into electric fleet. And we deliver something which provides mobility to areas which the government called white spots, where it was simply not commercially possible anymore to run timetable services. So we are providing things called buses. I'm not sure if you're Dutch, but that's something that's called a, I don't know how to translate this actually, where a village is taking ownership of a bus and is running social services or is running those buses on them by themselves. So you have
doesn't that deprive you of a business?
Absolutely not, because we are delivering the vehicle. We train the drivers, and we help them deliver mobility where it would be absolutely uncommercial for us or for the region to deliver, say, a 12-meter, 50-seater bus back and forth into the village. So we have something, and we organize that, and we help the full region to deliver mobility, not only in the city center, but also in the more cut-off areas, in the more rural areas. And part of that can be, if society wants that to be, part of that can be zero-emission buses. But if I can deliver that with a modern Euro 6 bus, because that's where the buck stops, or that's where the money stops, I'm also okay to do this. As long as I can take private cars off the road, I'm happy to do it.
We had one more question right in front here.
Thank you. It's Nate Matthews with the Global Resilience Partnership. Just reflecting back on your comment about sort of depressing, and I think I would venture to say that across the room, people here are less concerned about whether the glass is half full or half empty, but actually how do we fill the glass. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate the comments around bold cooperative leadership that's required. But I guess one of my concerns and challenges is I think we can easily drift past sort of business as usual and even into change as usual, but what we really need is breakthroughs. And I think a fundamental part of that is actually putting the environment and a healthy biosphere at the basis of all leadership decisions. So I'm really curious to hear some thoughts from the panel and about where we see those real breakthroughs given the urgency of the challenge that we have today.
Just going back to your original question about from the GF point of view, one benefit of working for the GF, we have an opportunity to take the entire Earth system as a united system. We tend to think this was still silo, the climate change silo, sometimes biodiversity or the ocean, but the fundamental message from the science is that those Earth system is united. It's basically one system. What we do have is that our human activity is becoming so vigorous and so forceful, and to the point that we actually break that to push the Earth system to its breaking point. So what we really need to do is to find a way for us to change ourselves before the Earth completely changed and slow us out of this prosperity and the environment. So I think that what is important is to the first and foremost, let's recognize that where we are in terms of human development and Earth system, there is a lot of good report of cost of inaction. I would like to say sin of ignorance. Because if we really don't understand what's going on here, and if we just continue business as usual, not only just the business, but also citizens and consumers and investors, we basically add a lot of the problem.
Is it a question of ignorance, or is it a question of sort of complacency and just not facing up to facts which are blatant? Because there's, it does seem to me like we heard about the IPCC 1.5 degree report. I mean, it was plastered all over the newspapers, including our own. It seems very, and a lot of people are suffering the consequences of these changes already, be they climatic changes or other. So is it really a question of lack of knowledge, or is it a question of just owning up to the fact that this is a problem? And how do you get people to act on that information, which already exists in abundance?
Well, two things. I still believe that majority of the society really don't capture or acquire what's going on. So it's more like ignorance. But even the leaders are well informed, actually the audience like us, that they're still, if we go back to the individual, that we really don't know what to do differently tomorrow, I think that's a huge problem. And that's why I'm pushing a little bit of this idea of the multi-stakeholder coalition, the platform as an actionable, actually the platform for us to really do our part. So depending on that, if you are the food sector, the land use sector, transport sector, you need to really see where in what kind of platform you can really be a part of the system change. I think that is more like a complacency part, maybe, that what you are talking about.
Okay, well, fingers crossed that works out. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next session. But I'd like to thank you very much for participation. This was a very interesting conversation. Please harass all the speakers that you see here. Harass them at networking breaks. I'm sure that they'll be more than happy to continue these discussions outside of this room. Thank you very much.